Good afternoon and welcome to the Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting for Monday, December 17th, 2007. This is a call to order. First order of business, I would like the City Council staff report. And we'll get some updates from Deborah Owen on the election, the Breakfast Club, and the Charter Revision Commission.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. A couple of updates. Of course, the next municipal election will be April 8th of 2008. We're actually doing some work, Jeff Schmidt in the Department of Planning and I and the other election officials from the school and the county will be actually working to make some precinct changes. This won't affect polling places per se, but because the city is expanding on the south side in the Lincoln County area, you'll see that come before you in a few weeks. And also, just to give you the heads up, we had sent a letter out. It's a custom letter that we do, or customary letter that we do to the school district. But at this time, the school district is contemplating perhaps not joining with the city election and perhaps going to join with the county for the primary. And I'll keep you updated as to their decision regarding that. In addition, the Breakfast Club meeting is this Wednesday at 7:30 at the Pavilion. We'll have your own agenda, your legislative agenda for 2008, which will be adopted by the council later this evening. And that will be a breakfast for all of the elected officials, city, county, and school district with our legislative delegation. And then just an update on the Charter Revision Commission. They have met last Thursday and then today at 2 o'clock. I believe all of the items that have been scheduled that you may have seen through past correspondence have all been acted upon, and so I believe they have an open agenda at this point, and they're moving forward. That's all I have. Thank you.
Is there anybody here from the mayor's office?
Bob, can I ask a question of Deb? Yes, Deb, I think all of us on the City Council here have a December 31st, 2007 deadline for reporting. Are the forms available now? And
oh, thank you.
Yes.
We have.
I don't want to get that $50 fine per day. So.
I don't want you to get it either. Yeah. Actually, we should get the final copy back today. We've worked through 4 drafts for the election booklets, which will incorporate the new laws that the City Council has acted upon in November. And so we've been working very hard on those books, and I believe those will be available shortly. We'll probably go ahead and email them out to each candidate who is running and then make them available in hard copy, and then, of course, available online for those who want to print them off at their home. Because of the timeline, we actually had wanted to incorporate a CAD system for reporting on, is it CAD? It's an electronic system where you could actually put the number in and it would carry through the different spreadsheets until your summary page. Given the timeline that we've had, we haven't been able to perfect that yet, but we hope to have that up by January. So thank you for reminding me about the report. Thanks.
Thanks for bringing that up, Dr. Staggers. It affects me as well. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr.
I
Kavanaugh.
have a question, too.
Yes, sir.
Does that apply to all 9 of us?
Yes, under the new election ordinances, incumbents will file at the end of the year. Even if you have no activity, we'll have a letter available for you to sign. Or if there's been activity or if there's a balance you're carrying over, then we'll need to have you fill out a campaign.
So when you say shortly, that means within the next few days, I assume?
Well, I'm hoping we have it back right now, but I haven't checked my email. Yeah, yes.
And I have a question with regard to the April election. We normally schedule our election with the school board, and as you indicated, they may not be doing that. It's normally our practice to do that to save money. So approximately how much money would we not be saving if we did not have? And is that going to require that we supplement our 2008 budget?
Well, that is, the election officials, both Bev Chase, Sue Roush, and myself, had gotten together a couple of weeks ago to discuss really the number of polling places, and that's really what it will stem off of. In the Drake Springs pool in the school district, that joint election, we had 19 polling places. The county would like us to have 50 polling places, which align with her legislative districts. I was hoping we can kind of come to some conversations and maybe kind of come closer to a number of agreement between the 3 entities. If we don't join with a school district, no matter what, we'll pay 100% as opposed to 50% of our election costs. So it will cost us more, depending on the number of polling places, because it's kind of like the cost per widget, if you will, in effect to our total sum. It will affect our bottom line significantly, what we choose to do.
So the motivation for the county to not join with us on that election is polling places?
Well, actually, the county doesn't join, but the school district. I cannot say entirely what their motivation would be to not join. We worked together for decades. We have a working agreement that's been executed back from the 80s that really, and it's been a great relationship between the two parties. I don't know if it has to do with voter turnout, with the primary being higher than the school district with the city, and they only have one candidate who would be up. I've heard at this point in time, and this is not, I don't think, finalized at all, it would be, is it Deb Hoffman? So it's really just one candidate, and they've thought about joining with the primary as opposed to with the city. In the city election, our deadline, or our date for the election is set by our charter, so it's not an easy date to change.
Well, it's of some concern to me that we don't have a resolution to this, and if there is some compelling reason for the school board not to do that joint election with us, I guess I'd like to hear it from them, because it does. I think it does boost voter turnout, and I also think it's good to save the taxpayers money. So when would you think that we might have an answer from the school board?
I would imagine by mid-January at the latest. The letter that we had sent out last week to Todd Vick requests, some correspondence from them to let us know how to plan our election.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions for Ms. Ohl? If not, moving on, is there anybody here from Mayor Munson's office with comments or report? Very good. We'll move on then to the Audit Committee.
No report.
Very good. How about number 5 is the Fiscal Committee?
No report.
Very good. Number 6 is Land Use Committee.
No report.
Number 7 is Public Services.
No report.
Boy, that was too easy. Well, now we get to the juicy part here of the City Council open discussion. See on our sheet there are a number of topics that we'd like to follow up on, and so we're opening the council or the meeting up to open discussion. Mr. Jameson.
Well, I think everyone received an email from Gary Caldwell, as well as an email from Deb summarizing what took place at the last meeting, and I respectfully disagree with Gary on the rendering of an advisory opinion, and I guess I'd turn it over to Gary to let him tell me why I'm wrong.
Councilor Jameson, can you tell me specifically where you think I'm wrong?
I contend that the advisory opinion is only available to a city council member under the provisions of this portion of the law where a complaint can be filed. I think also an advisory opinion can be rendered by the ethics board for an employee who might have a question, but I don't think there's a provision for the public to request an advisory opinion.
Thank you. I will address that based upon my review. First of all, I would point out that the right of the Board of Ethics to issue advisory opinions is created by the Charter. The Charter specifically gives that power to the Board of Ethics. I think what Councilor Jameson is referring to is Ordinance 12.5-47, which provides any council member may request an advisory opinion from the Board of Ethics, provided that such request is made prior to the filing of a complaint, as outlined in Section 12.5-48. I don't read that as being exclusive. Frankly, at the time that that ordinance was drafted, if it were meant to be exclusive, it would have been easy to add the language creating that exclusive right. It is not consistent, that interpretation, in my opinion, is not consistent with the intent of that ordinance. The intent of that particular ordinance is to limit the right of city council members to request advisory opinions, specifically stating that city council members cannot request an advisory opinion after a complaint has been filed. And I think that I understand the reason that the council would draft such an ordinance so that it's clear that you cannot, a council member could not defeat a complaint by filing a request for an advisory opinion after a complaint has been filed on the same subject matter. Frankly, I'm hard-pressed to express an opinion that I think would stretch the meaning of a particular ordinance, creating a limitation which would take away the right of citizens of this city to request advisory opinions regarding with issues dealing with city council members. Again, I would point out if that's what the council wishes this ordinance to say, it is an easy fix.
If I could, I would respond with the fact that if that were the case, politics could become very deadly for a council member by a citizen merely requesting an advisory opinion or a potential candidate requesting an advisory opinion about a council, and then it becomes public whether guilty or not of a misdemeanor. He's tainted by the fact that an advisory opinion was asked, and I think that's a thing I would like to see avoided, that council opinion, a council advisory opinion, to me is the council person is requesting clarification prior to any action he or she may take concerning some vote that might be of importance to the citizens of Sioux Falls. And if you take it beyond that anyone can request an advisory opinion, I think we're nullifying the intent of the ordinance. To me, the intent was that I, as a council member, can request an advisory opinion, or as an employee of the city, I can request an advisory opinion, and anything else would have to be treated as a complaint, so you get due process.
Mr. Costello.
Gary, is in an ordinance 3300, which deals with employees, doesn't it specifically offer an advisory opinion in a complaint? I can't find it right now, but I thought I read that before. Do you know?
Within the powers of the Board of Ethics, as identified in 12.5-18, parent 13, the board is specifically in subparagraph 1 given the power to initiate and receive complaints of violations. In subsection 13, the board is given the power to render advisory opinions at the board's discretion with respect to the provisions of Article 1 and Article 2. Again, I go, if the wish of the council is for 12.5-47 to create an exclusive right, it is a simple fix. But why wouldn't the ordinance simply say the only way that the Board of Ethics can issue an advisory opinion on Article 2 is at the request of a city council member? That is clear, and I think any other interpretation as the language now exists is strained, frankly.
Dr. Staggers.
Yes, Gary, is there any definition in city law about what an advisory opinion is?
No.
I think that's a major, major problem, because it seems to me that an advisory opinion is asked by an individual about possible future actions they might want to engage in. So like as Bob Jameson has mentioned here, a city council member might have concern about an action he wants to take or she might take, and they're asking for an advisory opinion. a department head might also have that kind of concern too. But also, I would concede citizens might have that concern too. If they're having a contract with the city, should I give a city council member this or whatever? They might ask about an advisory opinion for their possible future action. But for me to go around and saying, hey, I want an advisory opinion on Bob Jamison or Gary Caldwell or Vernon Brown or Pat Costello, that just doesn't sound right at all. Well, it isn't right. It's not right at all. Because as Bob Jamison has mentioned, this can become very political. So I think really we have a major problem here by not having a definition of advisory opinion.
I think if you read my email,
I read it several
first to tell
times.
you that I don't think that these ordinances are perfect by any means. I think that they could use some fine-tuning, but I think the ultimate question that the council needs to decide is whether, as in the adopted procedures of the Board of Ethics, any individual can ask for an advisory opinion, or whether you want to limit that right to either city employees, officials, or elected officials. And then you can define certainly advisory opinion, which is, I think, common sense tells you what it is, but it is not a defined term.
Yeah, I mean, to me, common sense defines what an advisory opinion is, but the way it's being used now is not in a common sense way. When we have citizens, asking about the actions of a council member, that should be a complaint. If they don't like what the council member has done, that's fine. But to ask for an advisory opinion, which to me is something contemplated in the future, so I think that we're having problems with the system right now.
Again, Councilman Staggers, it's a system that's been in place since 1995 when the charter was adopted. Historically, this is how it has operated. If this council is uncomfortable with that, please, by all means, take a look at this whole area of the code and take a look at what you feel needs tightening or changing.
I agree that we can do that, but also since we've had this so long, I would also hope that the department that's responsible for helping the ethics board would also be proactive. We're just reacting now. I think there should have been some pro-action in the past.
Again, I will state that we interpret the ordinances as written, and this ordinance as written, it is not our opinion that it creates exclusivity, but certainly if that's what the council wishes, change the ordinance. That would be our request of the council so that it is clear how you wish it to operate.
Mr. Kavanaugh.
I have a question for the city attorney's office. Perhaps I'm missing something here, but I'm looking at Section 12.5-47, which is contained within Article 2 of the ethics. Article 2 has to do with the council. Is that correct?
That's correct.
12.5-47 says advisory opinions. Any city council member may request an advisory opinion, et cetera, et cetera. That tells me, well, that is what it is. Where do you see, and perhaps I'm missing it, where do you see the authority for others to request advisory opinions?
I see it in the charter, which gives that power to, specifically gives that power to the Board of Ethics, and I don't see a prohibition denying the board that power in 47, again, because 47 is in its complete statement says that any member of the council may request an advisory opinion provided that the request is made prior to the filing of a complaint. I think that you could clearly read that as limiting the power of city council members to request advisory opinions, not creating it.
Certainly, that I would agree with that. But what I'm asking is, where in statute does it authorize others? Where does it say others may request an advisory opinion? Because I don't see that in here.
Again, I would refer you to the Councilman Kavanaugh to the charter language giving that power, and then to the operating rules of the Board of Ethics that have been in place since 1995, particularly Section 2.01, that provide any individual could request an advisory opinion. Again,
I'm sorry, where was that at?
it is in the rules of procedure adopted by the Board of Ethics since 1995, and it's Section 2.01.
Okay. Just a quick question. If the rules of procedure are not consistent with law, with the city ordinance, which trumps the other?
Actually, city ordinance would trump if there were an inconsistency. But again, I don't see any prohibition contained either in Article 1 or Article 2 that restricts the right of an individual, any individual, to request an advisory opinion of the Board of Ethics. I guess we can go round and round about this, but as city attorney and as the city attorney's office, and we have discussed this, we are loath to adopt an interpretation of an ordinance which limits the rights of citizens to have access to the Board of Ethics when the language of the ordinance is unclear. If you wish to restrict that, please clarify the language.
Mr. Costello.
Gary, I would say that, I would just say on your last comments that I don't think there's any interpretation that we're asking that limits the citizens' access to the Board of Ethics. They always have access through a complaint procedure. But you have, prior to this, had just said that it's provided in the charter that the citizens can file or ask for an advisory opinion. Where specifically in the charter is that provided?
7.01. That the Board of Ethics has the power to issue advisory opinions.
But specifically for city council members? Or is that, obviously for employees they do, but does that apply to city council members as well?
Absent a prohibition, I would say it certainly does.
Mr. Jameson.
Well, my question is that, following up on what Councilmember Staggers brought up, that an advisory opinion is something in the future and would be requested for anything that would concern my conduct. A citizen's conduct, his own conduct, would be asking for an advisory opinion. An employee would be asking for an advisory opinion on his conduct. But I don't think it would be possible for a citizen or anyone else to ask for an advisory opinion on Bob Jamison, Kermit Staggers, Bob Litz, or any other member of the council. That's where I'm having problems.
And, again, I guess we can go round and round on this. I am not espousing any particular position except the ordinances as we read them. If that is what the council believes the ordinances should say, please, let's clarify that particular provision so there is no confusion going forward.
Mr. Kavanaugh.
I'm sorry, but I believe you just told this council that we would be prohibited from doing that by charter.
I said, Councilman Kavanaugh, I said that the charter specifically gives the right to the Board of Ethics to issue advisory opinions. Absent a prohibition specifically stated in Article 2 that denies that right to the Board of Ethics from a citizen request, then we could not interpret either the charter provision or the ordinances to say that the Board of Ethics could not entertain a request from a citizen for an advisory opinion on Article 2 issues.
Dr. Staggers.
In your email to us, Gary, you mentioned about making an inquiry. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. We requested everybody who received a copy of the email whether they had forwarded it. I'm talking about the administration side.
No, I've heard this from two different people. So I'm just going to ask the question, were computers looked into, email accounts looked into in your inquiry?
Not in my inquiry. We did request of data processing whether we could trace the email which actually delivered the electronic opinion, and we were told we could not. if we could see who had actually received that email. We just made that request,
We're,
at least as so far as I know.
can I ask, Mike is here.
That's fine.
Yes.
Mike Hall, Central Services.
Yeah, I just mentioned to Gary that I've heard two different people say that the city had been involved in taking a look at computers to find out where, a possible email going to the Argus leader. Did that happen?
I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Mm-hmm. The question is, I've heard from two different people, and I don't know if this is true or not, and so that's the reason I'm asking the question. Did the city take a look at anybody's computer, email accounts, or whatever, to try to determine who had sent an email to the Argus leader, if an email had been sent?
Well, the only thing that I'm aware of, and it would come through me if there was a
Yes.
request to look at email, was to see if email had been sent to the Argus leader at a certain date and time, and we weren't able to identify.
But in the process, did you take a look at computers in the city?
Oh, no. We've got a filtering system that's set up. It'd be like looking at a certified or registered mail. You might be able to capture a date and time and a recipient as you would with a certified letter. You wouldn't be able to see the contents of the letter, but you could perhaps find out if something was sent at a certain time and date to a certain address.
Okay.
Yes. If I could,
Yes.
I want to give the council assurance. We've had this discussion. It's been a while, but the code of conduct and the code of ethics that we follow in IT is at the strictest, highest level. We're entrusted with that mail system, as is the post office, and we don't violate that trust. And I can give every council member here assurance that your individual email account to the city has never been violated. And I've never been asked by, I've been a director for 7 years, and I've never been asked by either administration to violate that trust.
Very good. Mr. Kavanaugh, and then we're going to move along here.
Mike, would that same assurance apply to any of the individuals that we communicate with?
Oh, absolutely. The only way that we, if I could expound, the only way that we look at an email account is if there's an investigation going on. And typically, if a city employee were being investigated, more often than not, that involves HR and the city attorney's office, and there must be some kind of reasonable suspicion to conduct an investigation. And then as the key holder, if you will, we could provide that tool to access. With city employees, again, there's a computer users agreement, and I think we've had this discussion, that reminds city employees that their email account is the property of the city, and that there is not to be any expectation of privacy. But with that said, and again, especially in light of the members of the city council, there has been no request, never an investigation, no request to investigate or to look at city council members' email.
Dr. Sagers, then we're going to move
Yeah.
along here.
Gary said that he had made an inquiry to you.
Well, what we were
What is-
talking about earlier, and there's two separate
Okay.
things here.
Okay.
One is to look at kind of that return receipt. And again, that's not looking at the email document itself. It's looking to see, did mail go from this location to another address? And that was undetermined. There wasn't any information to indicate that mail had gone from this location to, say, the Argus Leader at a certain date and time.
So so there was a check here to see. I don't know how the system works really. So I just assumed to get out of our system to get it over to the Argus leader, there's a point, and you were checking that point to see if anything had gone. Is that how that's working? Or-
Well, I use the term return receipt or certified letter, language just to kind of describe that when it leaves our email server, there's a date and time stamp that's put on that. We know the location where it's going.
Okay. Let me just, I guess, one more question. I don't want to belabor this, but is this appropriate to honor a request like that if a law has not been broken or whatever?
Well, I draw a huge distinction between looking at an individual's email versus the amount of mail that maybe has a postmark on it. If they're using the city's email system as you would the city's mail service, we put a date and time stamp on all of that mail.
So if there had been an email sent to the artist leader, you would have been able to tell Gary who had sent it, right?
Well, that's kind of a moot point because it never got to that.
Yes, but I mean, hypothetically then.
Yeah, the filtering system would allow us to see where that mail went to, yes.
Very good. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Dr. Staggers. You know, I'm not exactly comfortable here sitting here as the chair addressing these things, but, you know, as you might imagine, I've looked at the ethics or the appearance of ethics, you know, for the city council and this organization through a different set of lenses here recently. And, you know, there's a couple of things here that troubled me. Last week, we sat here and voted each other in on CCOG and UDC. And I would like to ask the city's legal department on a written opinion on the appropriateness of us doing that, number one. I thought if we did get in trouble, I'd be in great company, number one. Another thing that occurred to me is I've been to two of the charter revision meetings and listened to the proceedings and thought a lot about what's going on there, because ethics is a very important part of that discussion as well. In doing that, I see the assistant city attorney advising the ethics revision, or the charter revision committee. And I thought, yeah, is that appropriate? Because you know, we've got somebody with a vested interest advising changes in the charter. And I'm not certain that it shouldn't be an outside source doing that. And I wouldn't, you know, I see where throughout the conversations, all this, that we have the ability as a council to propose an ordinance for the charter revision. In light of all these things, and since we seem to be sort of at an impasse with this subject, I would like to assign this to the Public Services Committee for further review and investigation of types. Mr. Kavanaugh.
If I might, Mr. Chair, you're right, we're not going to resolve this today. But I think the Public Services Committee would be, is probably ill-equipped to look at this issue from the perspective that we have here. We have I think, a huge difference of opinion between many council members and our legal advisor. It's my understanding that we have in our budget a certain amount of money that we appropriate every year for outside legal advice. Is that not true? I would like to ask, rather than going to this committee, I would like to suggest that we ask the clerk's office to bring back to us at our next meeting what procedures, what dollar amount we might have, and what procedures we could put in place to request an outside legal opinion as to this issue.
Well, I'd like to take a little straw poll on that there, you know, as to who would be in favor of that here in the council. Raise your hand. Very good. The ayes have it. Then, Deborah, would you do that? And then, Vernon, I'd like to rescind my request to you to have one more thing in public services. Moving along here, are there any other things here that would like to be brought up? Pardon me, Mr. Costello, sorry.
Thank you, Bob. Gary, I just had one more question on this. On 7.01, on the general provisions, under the Board of Ethics, it clearly calls that the City Council shall, by ordinance, establish a Board of Ethics and administer and enforce violations. Isn't that what we're doing here in the form of Ordinance 32 and 33?
Yes.
Okay, so then if we further limit the procedures and powers, or so to speak, of how that's done, isn't that become the procedures by which they're supposed to follow? I mean, because I don't understand in Article 2, which accounts for city council members, there clearly is an advisory opinion in a complaint process. And in Article 1, that is for the employees, there is similar. I don't understand how you're saying that because it doesn't specifically say that citizens can ask for advisory opinions, that it's assumed that they can?
You're talking about, if I might, Councilor Costello, you're talking about 12.547.
Right.
Which again says that council members can request advisory opinions and limits it. Again, if that were meant to be an exclusive ordinance, it would have been a simple process at the time of drafting to provide that exclusivity. It did not. For more than 10 years, 12 years, the Board of Ethics has operated not treating that as exclusive. And frankly, what I am suggesting is that the language is not exclusive. Therefore, the proper interpretation is that individuals can request advisory opinions as per 201 of the procedures adopted by the Board of Ethics, but that if the council wishes to clarify that, it would be a simple process to clarify that ordinance, and then there would be no issue.
But, okay, so I think it is specific, and I would just call to your attention 12.5-17, where complaints where it refers to any person. So when they make a distinction on one part, any person, and another distinction, a city council member, don't you think don't you think they know who they're talking about, and they're aiming their specific policies towards certain classes of citizens, council members or regular citizens?
Again, I cannot read that ordinance as creating exclusivity, and I would not read that as prohibiting the right of a citizen to request an advisory opinion on Article 2 issues.
Dr. Staggers?
I mean, actually, I do agree a lot with what Gary's saying. I spent a lot of time taking a look at this, the charter and the ordinances and so forth, but I still think you have an extremely flawed definition of advisory opinion. I mean, I think that's the crux of the matter.
Well, are there any other concerns here for the open meeting today? Open discussion. Mr. Brown.
I have a question for the Finance Director regarding the ICMA billing. As I understand, we had talked about splitting the costs for the survey and using $07, but there's been some talk of using $08 of the council's budget to pay for that. Has that been straightened out?
Well, I think we've got to straighten out what it amounts to is we have a work-in-progress situation that you have to deal with from an accounting standpoint. We cannot pay for all of the cost of the ICMA citizen survey in 1 year because it's not going to be completed in 1 year. We've taken half of that and paid in 07 half of the amount, and we're going to have to pay the other half in 08. The only other thing we can do is pay it all this year in 07, but we would have to accrue a prepaid expense, and it would end up on your books the same way, so it doesn't make much difference which way we do it, whether we actually pay the cash or whether we accrue a prepaid expense.
Deborah, remind me, originally the council was going to pay for the whole thing, is that correct?
Yeah, I think this was an informational, and Dee was chair, and you guys came to a consensus about your commitment to the survey, and then about your commitment to the dollars spent.
So I'm unclear where we're at today.
Where we're at today is that the administration will pay half and the council will pay half. So, it seems like that's a partnership deal that we were trying to work toward.
Okay.
Seemed to be a logical.
And if the consensus was of the council to use $07, will we pay the 07 half, administration pay 08?
The administration, 07, for 07, administration and the council are each paying half. Actually, part of it is the original 50% that we put in. It was $8,900, I think, is the original payment. We split, we got that, pay 50% of that. The council is paying that, and the administration paid for 50% of the optional items, and that's about $4,900. We'll flip that around after the first of the year, and the administration will pay the $4,900 for the second half of the original down payment, and the council would pay, like I say, it's somewhere around $4,800 or something like that. If the other half.
Was the council consulted about its dollars being spent in '08?
Was the council, yeah, well, yes, they did have some consultation with some council members about it.
I don't think I had that conversation. I sit on that committee.
I would agree with you on that.
Shouldn't the entire council be involved in those conversations? Or at least all of them on the committee?
Like I say, I talked with one council member, and that's as far as it went.
Well, when talking about council dollars, I would encourage you to visit with the entire council about that.
Mr. Costello?
Councilor Brown, I was the one that Gene had talked to, and it really boiled down to this. It is all citizens' taxpayer money, and it really doesn't matter if it comes out of the city council's budget or the administration's budget. We were going to pay for all of this study at one time. The administration is offering to pay for half of it. We can't pay it all in 2007. So we were going to end up, I mean, if the bill's going to be $20,000, and we wanted, as a city council, to take $10,000 out and pay 2007, another $10,000 out in 2008, so be it. The administration is offering to pay for half. We can pay for roughly $5 in 2007 and take another $5 out of our 2008 budget. The reality is that neither one of us, the city council or the administration, wants to use our 2008 dollars. We both have excess dollars left over in 2007. We would both like to use that, but it wouldn't be prudent or make any sense at all to prepay the entire amount until we have some of our finished product. So I advise Gene that, we would just agree to, each split it half and half, and I just didn't see it as a big deal, and I apologize if I should have advised you after that conversation, but it's not a big deal to me.
Mr. Kavanaugh?
Do we have money? Do we have money in '08 to make our half of the second half payment?
You do have money in an account. I don't know that you had planned to spend it for this purpose, but you can always do a supplemental appropriation if you so wish to help pay for this. I think from my perspective, and I know Costello and I had visited, that I think we're looking for, when it takes a consensus of the council to pay for your dollars, you probably need to come to a consensus today as to what you're doing, because this is your budget. So, and Jameson had talked about perhaps a just vote or something.
Mr. Brown?
I don't take issue with how we're going to pay for it, but I think it's important that the full council know going into it, we set a budget for a reason, so let's make sure everyone's on board, and I like the idea of us just coming to a consensus today. I don't take issue with how the money is being spent. I take issue with decisions being made with only one person and not the entire council when it's the council budget.
Mr. Jameson?
Can we not encumber the fund for the balance?
We do not carry encumbrances forward in the general fund. That's
But
why
if
that's one of our big pushes at the end of every year, is to clear out those encumbrances, and you start over. We do not carry them forward.
But we do carry certain accounts forward as an encumbered
In the CIP,
fund. In the CIP. Is that the only one?
but not in the general fund. We
Okay.
wipe them out.
Why couldn't we do it in the general fund?
Well, it would be a change in accounting policy, for one thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
If I might, the charter actually says that each appropriation expires December 31, except for CIP projects, which have a 5-year life.
Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Gene. There's one other item here that I'd like to bring up here, and I don't know how much time we want to spend on it. We've got a meeting here in a little bit and a few more things to go through, but I'd like to revisit the veto message. the staff working group that is working on various areas of staffing throughout the city, and in particular, police funding. We've had a little bit of discussion, a few emails concerning that, and I'm just kind of wondering how the council would feel about assigning that to a committee. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Well, when you brought this up last week, I was completely unaware, as I'm sure most of this council was, that there was in fact a working group. I'm reading, I went back and read the veto message, and I quote from it. The mayor said, "With the council's support, I would suggest creating a committee of council members and city staff that would form a guiding policy for addressing staff needs in all areas." A day after our meeting, we get an email from the mayor's chief of staff saying, "Oh, the mayor has appointed a small working group. They're working on a strategy, and they're almost done with it, and they're going to bring their recommendations to the council." That is not my opinion, working with the council to form a guiding policy. That is putting together the recommendations and then bringing it to us. I'm not sure how this happened, but I'm not happy about it. I think this is counter to what was stated in the veto message, and I'm just not sure where we're at with this. Again, from what I understand, they're almost done with their recommendations, and we've had no input in it.
I think we all had a common email from the mayor talking about this and the probability of bringing something forward, and the mayor was looking for 2 to 3 council members to put input on the product that they have here. And I discussed it with council leadership, Dee Knutson, before she left, and I did not get a response, but I was wondering if Councilor Kavanaugh, you expressed an interest. Mr. Brown, I was wondering if you would be interested in this here, and I certainly would donate some of my time unless there's another volunteer on the council that feels real strongly about showing up for this. Mr. Kavanaugh?
Well, I certainly would be more than willing to serve on this group. I just want to reiterate that I'm disappointed that we're being asked at this point in time to become involved, when in fact we should have been asked 2 months ago.
Very good. Then would the council as a whole feel it acceptable if Mr. Kavanaugh, Mr. Brown, and Mr. Jamison has just agreed to take my place on this here? Would that be suitable for the council? Anybody object? Very good. Those are the names that we'll put forth to give to the mayor then to review the proposal that they'll have. Moving along here, we have a staff report on the horizontal collector well. Mr. Mark Cotter from Public Works is going to get up. And then shortly, for a short item after, or a short period of time afterwards, there's a lady who came here, Miss Lois Brown, and we're going to also allocate her an amount of time.
Thank you, Council. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. With me tonight is Randy Jansen, the Division Manager for Water Purification, and also the project manager that wrote our drinking water facility plan that addresses the expansion that we are proposing for the well field. We have about a 30-minute presentation for you, and knowing that you've got is it a 5 o'clock meeting? We will go through this much faster than we intended, and so trying to leave out.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mark.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, would it be possible if, at 5 o'clock we have the regular meeting, could we maybe have a recess maybe at 5 o'clock, and then I think just do the joint meeting real fast and then start up again? Would that be possible?
Has anybody got objections to that? I think that sounds like a good idea. In fact, it's such a good idea, I was going to propose it myself, Dr. Staggers. So
we're on the same...
we're great minds
yes.
roll together here. So that would, well, then you're going to come back after we're done with our meeting then, Mark? Would that be acceptable to you?
We'll certainly stay.
Very good. Lois, would that work for you? I see you have a small child with you. Very good. Okay, Lois, thank you. That would put us back to Mr. Rowenhorst. Gene, has Gene left the room? Well, we were looking for his monthly financial update. Well, I guess then if we're very good. Okay, we're just going to wait here just a minute here.
Sally has something to present, I think, too.
Pardon me?
Sally Fields, under the financial report.
Oh, Sally, did you have something to report? You're a subset. Very good. You want to get ahead of Gene here? Well, You could sure control the meeting there.
Well, thank you. Actually, I just wanted to bring you up to date briefly on the where we are with the main library project and specifically where we are with our cost estimates. And I know Gene sent you a memo that talked about the quality of life bonds, and I imagine he was going to go over that. But part of what is in there is that pending the approval of the CIP committee, you can expect to receive a supplement request for this project from me in January in the amount of $1.5 million. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about what has happened since we gave our last cost estimate, which was back early in January. I'll go through this quickly. As you can imagine, it's very complex, and if you have questions, and I'm sure you will, I'll be glad to try to get you answers and answer anything we can today, but I know you're pressed for time. There are a whole host of things that have changed since January. And as you can imagine, when you go through a project like this, that's certainly likely to occur. There are certain items that are small items, and there are certain ones that are larger ones. So I just want to quickly go through some of the larger ones that have contributed to the change in the cost estimates. One of those, probably a top priority, well, it's not probably, it is a top priority, is security. And that's security of the building and security of the people who come to use the library and the security of the staff that work there. It's no surprise to you that this has been an issue with our downtown library back for quite a number of years. And when you talk with people, the public, they want to make sure that we do what we can to make sure the building is safe for people to come. So we have added quite a bit of items that relate to security in our discussions with the architects over the last several months. I'm not going to go into all the details of that at this point. I certainly can do that, at a later point. The architects are certainly planning for security, but not to the extent that we really wanted to have it. So that is a contributing factor in this new cost estimate. We ran into some utility issues. Electrical transformer has to be relocated, and fiber cable has to be relocated. And it's interesting because the fiber cable that connects City Hall with the library, with the Law Enforcement Center, goes through the library. So this has caused, again, a much more complicated electrical issue to be dealt with than probably any of us realized at the beginning, and certainly than the architects realized. We are looking at flexibility for the future, and it actually was a recommendation of a few of you when the architects were here back in September, that we make sure that we build the addition so that it can be added on to in the future. I was under the impression at that time that we had communicated that to the architects, but we had not, and I take responsibility for that. So we have made changes, and the plan now does call for us to be able to build, obviously we're not going to build a second floor now, but in the future to be able to build onto that. So that has added to that cost estimate. We also have what is called an access flooring system, and it's a raised floor so that you have easy access for it underneath. One of our issues we've been dealing with at the main library, and many places I'm sure have been dealing with it, is that our cables are full, and they've been full for quite a while. And so one of the advantages of an access flooring system is that, you just pop it open and you can go under it. So it is very, very flexible. The architects had not planned to put this under the new addition, but we really felt that we needed to have it there, again, looking for flexibility for the future. We're working on curb appeal, if you will, for want of a better word. The main library, has been very functional for these past 35 years, but it certainly is a very utilitarian, unattractive building. So we have done things to enhance the look of the building, both on the outside and the inside, and these also have contributed to that cost estimate. And finally, furniture and equipment. We've updated that. We'll use whatever furniture we can in the building. If we can use the shelving, we will. I think some of the shorter shelving in the children's area we will be able to reuse. I'm not sure about the tall stacks. We're going to lower the height of the stacks for a variety of reasons. But we're going to be buying a lot of shelving, tables, chairs, chairs that go with tables, comfortable seating, chairs for comfortable seating in areas, computers, phone system, and it goes on and on and on. So we did need to update those costs as well. Just quickly, the timeline is to let the bids in early February, and then award a contract in early March, and then begin construction early April. As I said, pending the approval of the CIP committee, we will be bringing forward a supplemental request in January.
Thank you, Sally. Any questions of Sally? Mr. Costello.
Sally, could you please email us tomorrow or whenever a little bit more detailed on the $1.5 million and the dollar amounts to all those various things you just mentioned?
I will do the best I can with that. Some of the items I can put a dollar amount exactly to. Some I need to work with the architect on. It's kind of been a work in progress, so I will do the best I can for you on that.
Thank you, Sally.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Rowenhorst. Mr. Rowenhorst, would you like to do your monthlies?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr. Kavanaugh.
I would suggest that we've got less than 5 minutes here. I think our guests here from the north, I think let's get them seated, let's start our meeting on time, and we can recess.
Very good.
And go back to the
Those are Kavanaugh and Grant.
Continue the Sioux Falls City Council, December 17, 2007, informational meeting. Mr. Rowenhorst, appreciate your patience. If you'd come up and give us your monthly financial update.
I really want to, Gene Rowenhorst, Director of Finance for the City of Sioux Falls. I really didn't intend to spend a lot of time on the financial report itself. What I'll tell you is we're tracking what's going on towards year end, and if with a little bit of luck and we don't get any snow, we're going to have a nice tidy sum of money to turn back at the end of the year. But snowfall is the big question mark, and we'll wait and see how that turns out. I don't have any new information at this point to tell you about sales tax. We haven't gotten our first check in for December, but remember, we will get the 2 checks in December and the first check in January before we really know where we're at with the sales tax. But it's going to be squeaky on that piece of it, but we should be okay. We will be okay. It's just a matter of how much we actually have left. What I wanted to focus on, was there any particular questions about the financial report for the month?
Mr. Costello.
Gene, you just brought it up. Now, of course, you're aware that we just appropriated $2 million more for snow removal. Are you indicating that the excess that will be turned in will be in addition and be above that $2 million that we just talked?
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? Gene?
What I wanted to focus on was the bonding situation and where we're at today. You received an email. Well, in your email, you should have got Friday, and I assume there may have been some hard copies handed out dealing with the quality of life bonds, and I wanted to go through those with you so you're fully apprised of what's transpired there. I kind of want to go at this backwards. Go to the last page. And this is a report that comes in from Doherty and Company upon the sale of the bonds. And what I want to point out is that we got a par. There was a par amount of bonds of $25,570. That's the number that you've always seen. However, the bidders actually paid a premium for the bonds, for the coupon, and they paid us a premium of $495, almost $496,000 as a premium. So we actually got cash of $26,065,000 that was delivered to us. Then the use of the funds, the way that's been broken down, the first time is the underwriter's discount, and this actually cuts into the $495 premium that we received. But then it goes back to the company. If you look up the top of the page, it's Stifel, Nicholas, Hanford, and Imhoff. It's a firm out of Chicago, and I'm not familiar with them. I've not heard their name before, but their money is Green's, and I've got it in my bank account now, so all is well. Then we had cost of issuance of $77,000. That's primarily attorney fees, legal fees for bond counsel, and for our financial advisors. There also is some money in there for the bond trustees, things of that nature. Then the company also, that when they bid on this, we did not offer to insure the bonds. They wanted them insured up to AAA. For that, they took out $123,000. And then you have $2 million that goes into reserves. And then we capitalized the interest for the first year, and that capitalized interest of $1,019,000 is what you're showing there. So the net proceeds is the $22,652,000. That's the actual construction proceeds that we have to spend. If you flip back one page now, just for your interest, when they buy a bond with a premium like that, they get the money back in a coupon. So here's the different coupons that they laddered out. The main thing to look at is right down at the bottom, there's a line called true interest cost. It's grayed out on your form there. And what that is, that's the true interest cost. It's 4.3081597%, or 431. So that's the actual cost. It's for those of you that are familiar with average percent or average APR, average percentage rate, and mortgage loans or something like that, that's what this number is. So it goes back and figures out all these fees and all that kind of good stuff that's in here, and then it comes up with what the actual interest rate is with all the other fees cranked into the calculation. To give you some sense, the Lewis and Clark bonds went out at a 447 true interest cost. The main difference is that these are 20-year bonds. The quality of life are where the Lewis and Clark bonds were 30 years, so we paid up a little bit. The bottom line is we did the quality of life bonds basically right on top of the Lewis and Clark bonds as far as pricing goes. We think we got a really good competitive bid. There was 5 companies that bid for it, and this outfit got it. And they were all right together, so nobody left anything laying on the table, and it give you a good sense that we probably got the best deal, because there was 5, like I say, there were 5 bidders, and they all really were right together. To continue on, now we can go back to the original memo. The first page on that, you see the $22,652, which is what I showed you back on the last page, that we actually have available in construction funds. Then we have the 3 projects, the $4.7 million for Drake Springs, the $4.2 million for Harmadon, and we have $11,345,000 for the main library. So we've actually got construction costs that have been approved of $20,257,000, and that left us $2,394,000. Then you see that we took out another $1.5 million. That's the changes that Sally talked to you about just a few minutes ago. So we're going to end up with a contingency of $894,000 for the period of the construction. We don't know what the bids are yet that are on the library, but if the bids all come in, first the $4.7 million on the swimming pool, that is what will be spent on that. We'll back into that construction. The $4.2 million for Harmadon, we've got about half of that done, probably not quite half of it done, and we'll finish up the rest of it the summer of '08. So the numbers on that are pretty hard. So the main library is the one that we don't, we've got the architect's estimates, but that's as good as the numbers get there, and we won't know for sure until we actually let the bids out on that. So with that, what I'd like to draw you, are there any questions on the bonds themselves there?
Mr. Benninga.
Gene, can you tell me a little bit about the timing of when we will finish the bids on Drake Springs and Harmadon, so we know exactly what the reserves are going to be?
Well, the Drake Springs, like I say, we'll back into. That'll be a build to $4.7 million. Whatever you can build, you build. So that number is a pretty hard number. The Harmadon Park one, I believe those bids are actually all let already. Of course, we've already done almost $2 million worth of the work that's been done. We will pay sales tax back out of these proceeds. And I think the bids have actually been let on the second part of it, although I'm not sure of that.
Assuming that the architect's estimates are correct, is the CIP committee going to recommend how the almost $895,000 would be used if in fact it's needed?
Well, the CIP committee would, but we'll look into that towards the end. We've got almost 2 years to go before we'll be ready to make that decision.
Right.
Mr. Brown?
Gene, are you concerned at all about the $894,000 not being enough of a contingency?
It's a little on the tight side, but there are contingencies in the library construction numbers already. I believe there's a 10% contingency in there, so we've got another layer of it. Worst case, sales tax might have to come up with some money if we couldn't get all the work done for what's anticipated at this point. And over the next 2 years, we'd certainly be able to find enough money in the sales tax to pay any shortage that we didn't have from the bonds.
Mr. Kavanaugh?
Gene, would it be possible, another scenario might be that we'd have alternates in the bid? Would that be?
Oh, yeah. The whole bidding process of the library, I really can't talk to you in great detail about exactly what's going to happen there. So I'm sure that all the alternatives are open. I don't know if they'll have any alternative bidding in it or not.
But in terms of, you'd have a base bid, then you'd have alternates that way if it did, okay. Just back to this, I need to understand, get my head around this. The reoffering premium, that's actual money that they paid to us for?
Yeah, they wired, Stifel wired us $26,065,911.85.
And that additional $495,000 we are going to use for what?
Well, that is used in actually two places. The underwriter's discount, you can essentially take the 145 out of that, the 145,000, and then the 123,300 for the insurance to try and bring it up to a AAA bond.
Okay.
And the rest of it will come out in the coupons.
Coupons?
The actual coupons that you see listed in here, those coupons are priced to recover the remainder of that amount of money by the buyer of the bonds.
So the additional $495,000, is that going to cost us over the course of 20 years additional interest?
No, see, the 430 that we're talking about, or 431 we're talking about, that cranks in all of these front-end costs. It's just like when you make a real estate loan and you have a bunch of appraisal fees, closing fees, all that kind of good stuff, and that all gets cranked into when you calculate the APR. That's exactly the way this works, and that's why you use that true interest rate, because it takes all of these different twists out of here. Normally why somebody would do or why they're pricing the bond the way they did with the coupons and paying the premium, they've got a buyer for those bonds that for some reason wants this in their portfolio structured in that particular manner. Okay. We don't know about it.
Mr. Bennigan.
Just to follow up on the reserve question, and I'm not sure, can you tell me or find out the information on the reserves that were projected into those three projects? You talked about 10% for the library. Did we use the same 10% for the pool and the park?
Well, like I said, there is no reserve in the $4.7 million because we will back into that number. Whatever 4.7 million buys us, that's, that you'll bid, the bid on that is going to be bid to a budget of 4.7. End of story.
What about the park?
There's not as much in the way of reserves there, like I say, because I'm about 99% sure we've got those contracts out already. We just couldn't get to them this year, in 07.
Mr. Costello? Anybody else? Well, thank you, Gene, for your patience.
Well, let me take you one step further.
Very good.
The question always seems to come up. Turn to page 16 in your financial report, and that is all of the outstanding debt that the city has at this point, including the quality of life bonds. And what I want to point out, if you go about halfway down the page, you'll see I hope you got your magnifying glasses or you have your good glasses on.
Yeah.
The print's a little small. It says total debt governmental activities. That comes to $88,297,000. That is debt that is being paid by sales tax or out of the governmental funds. If you go down to the next section, total debt business type activities, in that same amount outstanding, $141,853,000. Those are primarily bonds that are, there's a pledge of sales tax, but the repayment is actually coming from user fees. So it's not a draw on our general funds. It is, this is water and water rec primarily. That's the big chunks in it that we have there. So we broke this down a little bit differently for you so you can see which bonds are governmental and which one are the ones that are actually coming out of the revenue bonds and their user fees. Then if you look at the real fine print down on the bottom, there's two things down there. The first one, resolution number 17707, that's the SRF loans that some reference has already been made to. You approved the application for those funds 2-3 months ago. Tonight you're going to be looking at the actual ordinance to approve the issuance of 4 out of 6 of these bond issues with the SRF funds. These are 2.5% loan money for that kind of activity. And the last thing I want to draw to your attention, you've heard about the special assessment bonds that we've been working on to get the streets up where we want them to from a timing standpoint. We're showing $7 million here. That's actually going to come out to be about $5.8 million when all the smoke settles. $7 million is what you approve, but we're working with Wells Fargo right now to they won the RFP to provide the funding for us, and they're working with us very closely. And that number is going to be about $5.8 million. So that is the bond position. If anybody asks, you should be able to tell them in great detail what we have outstanding in terms of debt and who's supposed to be paying for it. Other questions, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Staggers?
Yes, Gene. This is about the line of credit. We were supposed to get proposals in and so forth some time ago. How's that going?
We got one respondent.
One respondent, and it was Citibank?
Yes.
And what kind of interest rate did they propose at this time?
6%.
6%.
Any other questions of Mr. Rohnhorst?
So are we going to accept that then?
Yes, we're working on them with it right now.
Okay.
Mr. Kavanaugh?
Sorry. With regard to the 2 SRF loans that you referenced, I'm wondering, and I realize these are enterprise supported, part of the business type activities. They will be part of that debt service.
Yes.
Either you or Mark could answer this question. When we have our annual assessment, I know you have the consultants come in and you review what's going on and you realign our rates based on that. Do they take a look at this type of debt? Do they take a look at what our capacity is for taking on this debt and what our alternatives might be?
Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. They certainly do, and especially with some of the bonds that are in front of you tonight for council, we've looked at our revenue streams, and we certainly have coverage for that. And so that the piece that gives us that surety when we do it every year allows us to look at what our CIP projects are, what our expected financing is, and what our expected rates would be. So we do.
Thank you.
Anybody have?
Just one thing to note on here. There's actually, I believe, 6 loans, Chad, SRF loans here, 4 of which you will see tonight. That's about half of it, and the other 2 will be coming. I'm not sure how much later they'll be coming, but you have 2 more coming yet then. Total of just right at $50 million.
Thank you, Gene. Next, we have Mark Cotter, Director of Public Works. He's going to give a presentation on the horizontal collector law.
Good evening again. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. Tonight with me is Randy Jansen. He's the Division Manager of Water Purification and also the project manager that wrote our drinking water facility plan, Mark Hardy, with Howard R. Green's with us. We also have invited Lois Brown with East Dakota to be here tonight for this discussion on the facility plan, the outcome, and the recommendation. Okay, tonight we're going to cover about 20 slides, and we will share that responsibility on the podium here. I will cover the history of the well field, take you through why we write a facility plan, the alternates, and then Mark will take you through the analysis, what some of the advantages and disadvantages are with these different wells that were reviewed, give you a picture of some of the cities and what the industry trends are regionally and nationally, and also give you our recommendation and be available for questions. So let's get started. Okay, one of our slides we'd like to draw attention to is our first one. Our existing well inventory got 69 supply producing wells. There's 16 Bragstead wells, and each of these will give you a schematic of what they look like. But just to give you a history point of when they were constructed, 16 Bragstead wells, that is a previous city engineer that was proprietary to the City of Sioux Falls. There was a number of those constructed in the airport area between the 30s and the 50s. There's 14 collector wells. These are truly the backbone of our system, and they're proven as we constructed a number of them in between the 50s and the 70s, and then now again from the 2000s moving forward. We've got a period in the 80s and 90s where there was 36 vertical wells that were developed, and then also 3 miscellaneous wells. The two pie charts, I think, are very telling, where we've got where we break them down by number on type, and on the up above where it says 53%, that's 53% of the wells are the vertical style wells. One of the key things we want you to look at, though, from the difference in the pie charts is the top one, 20% of our wells are collector wells, and then conversely, the pie chart on the bottom, those 20% of our wells produce 62% of our current supply.
Excuse me, if I could ask what's a collector well? Is it the Rainy?
It is.
Oh, okay.
They are called Rainy collector wells. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, we took like a 20-year break. We went from collector wells, and then we spent 20 years doing vertical wells, and then now we're going back to collector. What's that all about?
And potentially Randy can speak to this, but there was a philosophy during the 80s and 90s that we were developing several vertical wells. And I think what we're seeing now as a part of this recommendation is our 14 collector wells that were developed in the 50s that are still the backbone of our system are still producing significant amounts of water. What we see in the vertical wells that are, once they reach that 15 to 20 to 25-year life, we're having to go in there and fully redevelop them based on what they were developed for capacity at the beginning to really where they're at today. We certainly, don't get me wrong, the vertical wells have their place and in some conditions produce very good, but we'll kind of take you through the different pieces schematically of what makes up the different wells and hopefully answer some of those questions. But again, that's really what we want to show you from here. 20% of our wells, which are the collector wells, they produce 62% of our water. Okay, real quick schematic of the Bragstead wells. These are very good wells. Again, they're proprietary to the City of Sioux Falls, previous city engineer. And these are large diameter. They're 40-foot in diameter wells with orifices at the bottom where the water comes in, these well ports. And essentially what happens is as water comes into a well, some material can get into the well. Well, what Randy's crews does on a scheduled basis as it's needed, potentially up to in that 5 to 10 year ranges, we go in and actually any material that makes its way into these well ports starts to reduce the amount of capacity of water that can come in. So they can simply go in and remove any of the material that gets inside here. And then the unique part is that just P-rock gets dumped down here. And so this, it gets to be some fairly clean material to kind of redevelop the well and give it several years of life again. Again, constructed back in the 30s, still producing great amounts of water for us. Schematic on a vertical gravel packed well. We've got a number of these in our system. We've got also some aerial views that we'll show you by color how many of these to add up to that 13. But essentially, you drill a hole, a vertical hole, and then you sink a stainless steel well screen and pack the outside of it with clean gravel. One of the things that's key is that we've got a shallow aquifer for Middle Skunk Creek and for the Big Sioux River. And so one of the things that you have to be aware of is that this last bullet, when we talk about total vertical screen length of approximately 25 to 35 feet, and Mark Hardy will speak more to this when he gets up here, but one of the things we've got is we've got a static water level here listed. But once you start to pull water into a well, you start to get something that's called the cone of influence, which starts to come down at that kind of an angle. And it's hard to show that on this. But one of the things you'll see is then we've only got, if this is 50 feet from the ground to the bottom of the aquifer, you probably only have about 60% of that depth that you can actually use for real screened material, real screening where you can get water in. So again, if we're at a 50-foot depth aquifer, we're probably only going to have a screened depth of about 25 to 30 feet. So remember that number as we talk about the horizontal collector wells and how we're trying to, for this evaluation, we're trying to look at 3 vertical wells as opposed to 1 horizontal collector well. Okay, schematic on the horizontal collector well. Again, these are very good in shallow aquifers that we have just north of the city, where there is a 16-foot diameter casing that is sunk down to either hard clay or bedrock. And then from this point, we push out approximately 200 feet. And so if we do that 4 or 5 times around that radius, that's that horizontal collector well, which in the previous slide we talked about with a vertical well. For each development, we would probably be in about 30 feet of screen where we actually receive water. Each one of these is close to 1,000 feet. It is also at the bottom of the aquifer, and so we don't have that cone of influence as much as what you do when you've got a concentrated vertical pipe. You've essentially lowered the whole area slightly as opposed to one small area. That's why it many times takes multiple vertical wells to try to achieve what you can do with 1 horizontal well. The other key here is with the maintenance, you see that there is a valving here. One of the questions that came up prior to the meeting is that it was understood that horizontal collector well screens don't last as long. The only thing that would cause is if like a mild steel went in during the original development. We did have some of those. But our intent is whether we do a vertical well or a horizontal collector well that it would be stainless steel, good stainless steel. Okay, we'll have 2 pictures here of the well field. We've got one that's in Middle Skunk Creek, and this interchange, just to reference you, this is the Baltic exit. And this is Middle Skunk Creek, and there's 13 vertical wells that are in this area. And you'll notice this transmission line that's on the next slide to link in with the Big Sioux River aquifer wells. Okay, one of the reasons you'll see that our recommendation is that our intent is to have the most water from the fewest amount of wells. We've got a number of wells that have been developed all from the airport area, all up and through here near the Big Sioux River. And they've been broken down for you there in the graph. There's a number of Bragstead wells that are in the airport area, Here's the bulk of the collector wells, and then this area here, that's well 69. That's where we're talking about whether that would go back in at, say, 3 vertical wells or 1 horizontal collector well. Sorry. Okay, the wellfield facility plan. What's its purpose? It's required to receive state revolving funds. Just like Gene had mentioned, they are. It's a program that is for water systems like ours, and one of the things it does, it allows the people that administer the funds, that makes them know that we looked at our alternatives and we selected the best alternative for the situation. It also includes the descriptions of the projects and the opinions of probable cost. It also provides the final recommendation. The alternatives evaluated were really 4, and every facility plan you'll see always has a no action. What happens if we don't do this? The next 2 are new vertical wells near the existing well 69, and well 69 right now is a vertical well. Then a new horizontal collector well in this same location, or we go off and we find a new area through test pumping to locate a brand new location for a new horizontal collector well. Essentially, we're going to focus on the second and third bullet tonight to really focus down in those areas. Okay. Looking at new vertical wells near well 69, we've got a schematic coming up here as well. This looks at abandoning the existing vertical well, number 69, constructing 3 new vertical wells with an expected target water supply of 1.5 million gallons per day. To make them equal and to make them compatible with our existing system, you'll see that both cost evaluations have that we would bring the area where the well is, we'd raise that area up so we're above the flood stage. So in the event there's an event greater than the 100-year flood, that well house has got protection. We also want to make sure that we have access to it and protection for the pumps, the VFDs, we call them, vertical frequency drives. One of the things we'll talk about is that in many cases, that when you have a vertical well, you either have it's 2-speed, it's either on or it's off. One of the things we're doing throughout sanitary sewer and water is that the technology is there to use VFDs, which means that we can match that motor speed to what our actual supply needs are. It's better for the pumps, it's better for our energy. It just allows us, with the logics that we can do now with the depth of the aquifer and the amount of supply that we need, both options have VFDs in them. The necessary control panels and other equipment. For the 2 additional well sites, we would be purchasing land. That would also have to get roads to their area, have to put raw water transmission mains in, and have to get power to each site. What you're seeing there in the photos is the last horizontal collector well, but that can be a very similar well house, and then that's just one of the vertical turbine pumps there. Okay, to give you a schematic of what we've got here for well 69, and bear with me on my pointer. This is the existing location, and this is the existing raw water transmission main that comes over to a large main that goes to the plant. So one of the first ones would be to just simply move over and drill another well here. Now, on HRG's team, they've got a hydrogeologist, and a rule of thumb can be 1,000 feet apart to develop additional wells. Okay? So what we did was we've got a 1,000-foot diameter radius, and then we've got 2 additional wells here. So that's where, we've got this existing transmission main, but we'd also need to put transmission mains here. We'd have to put roadways. We'd have to go through the environmental permitting aspect. We'd have to go out there and certainly do more test pumping to make sure that these are good locations for wells. And we also don't have the probability that this well here may end up affecting the yield of one of the original ones. But for purposes of the cost estimate, this is the spacing, and this would be a representative layout. Okay? Okay, now looking at one new horizontal collector well in this same location, and this is the same well house shown here. There's also an interior area. Here's the vertical turbine pump. Here's that VFD drive that allows us to logically from the plant, if you've been in the water plant, you'll see that Randy's SCADA, that they can dial in these wells exactly where they need them. This is the logic that we use to do that. And so here's one vertical well, one horizontal collector well with a target of 1.5 million gallons per day. We would have the same variables in place that we would have with the other wells, which is we'd build the area up above the 100-year flood event. We'd have the vertical turbine pumps, VFD drives, control panels, flow meters, displays, and other equipment. We'd be using the existing access road, the existing raw water transmission main, and we've already have power to the site. The area has been permitted, and so we would essentially be able to move forward. This is this tower here. This is the communication device that allows Randy's team to work with this well all over the wire. Okay, so a similar schematic, only we've removed some of the captions. This is where we would abandon the existing vertical well and sink a new vertical well. We'd be utilizing the existing access, the existing power, and utilizing the existing raw water transmission main to get over to the main feeder. Okay, Mark Hardy will take you through the financial analysis of this, and it's side by side there for 3 vertical wells, and keep this presentation moving for you.
Thank you, Mark. Mark Hardy with Howard R. Green Company here in Sioux Falls. This slide, like Mark says, does a side-by-side comparison, and I've listed out some of the major items and kind of how they compare across the board. If you look at rows 3 and 4 with the 3 vertical wells, you can see that the cost of a vertical well we have estimated at around $69,000 if you add those two numbers together, the $16,000 and the $52,000. So the vertical well, there's no doubt, is a less expensive option when you just look at the well construction and the pumps and kind of the nuts and bolts of the well itself. As compared to the collector well, we have the 16-foot diameter caisson that's about 18. The walls of it are about 18 inches thick, and it's fairly expensive to sink that down to the bottom to hit bedrock. So you can see that the cost for the well there is a little bit over $1 million. So more expensive when you look at the well. However, when you start looking at some of the other things that play into it and get the total project to get that whole 1.5 million gallons into the collection system, you start looking at things like item number 5, the piping that has to go to the 2 wells. We've assumed that 1,000 feet to each well is how we come up with that 2,000 feet. At $60 a foot, that's $120,000 for water main to bring the water in. As well as land acquisition, we're assuming about 1.5 acres times 2 additional sites comes up to a $30,000 price tag for the vertical wells, whereas the collector well has no additional cost because we're staying right there at the existing site. Like Mark said, adding the access road and getting that built up, it's kind of a standard for the city to have a good access road, cobblestones, and built up so if it does flood to have means to get out to each individual well. So take that times 3, that adds up. Already mentioned the mound. Site work is just some of the miscellaneous valves, gates, and a flushing hydrant, and some of the other miscellaneous culverts and things like that. The actual look at it on individual basis, the vertical well is less for each individual one, as the collector well is more on a unit basis, but overall it's more costly to do it at 3 sites than it is 1. And then items 10, 11, and 12 are the actual structure. Like Mark mentioned, each individual well has a building above it. And I guess the question may be, do we need a well house at each of the individual wells? And we feel that the answer to that question is yes, because, like Mark mentioned, some of the SCADA control that we have, SCADA is a fancy word for controls, and be able to operate those individual wells from the treatment plant, be able to turn them on and off. And because the city their well field is continually growing, we're at 69 well sites now, it's prudent that the city take in some of this technological advances to be able to help manage that system. That's a lot of wells, it's a lot of windshield time for an operator to go out there and check on a well that may only be producing a couple hundred gallons a minute, but still needs the O&M to be able to keep it running. So by being able to monitor those from the plant and get data coming back, it's more efficient to be able to do that. So the city staff has several years ago made the decision to upgrade their control system to be able to, for example, measure the water level in the well and know how close it is getting down into the screen. If your water level draws down into your screen, you start having problems with it fouling and that well screen corroding and basically getting clogged up and preventing the water from coming in the well. So monitoring that water level is important to keep the efficiency up. Also, the city likes to be able to look at the flow and do a process monitoring of that well. If the flow coming from that well is going down, then they know that it's time to do maintenance, so they like to measure the flow coming from those wells. And then the radio telemetry, just the having a battery backup, and those types of things require a panel and sophisticated equipment that is just conducive to being inside a controlled environment. To have that in a panel outside and having to work on that in the snow, in the dark, in the very cold temperatures, it's not a good fit. Similarly, the city has they prefer vertical turbine pumps where they have the motor sitting above ground. You can feel the motor if it's hot. You can check if it's vibrating. Just a more positive way of monitoring their equipment. And then again, with Mark on the VFD drives, there's logic in those drives that allow it to automatically look at the water level and to see if it's getting close to where the screens are, and it also can look at the pressure out in the system. This is something that Randy and his staff deals with in the summertime. It's one thing in the wintertime when you only have a few wells running, but in the summertime, when you have almost every well you have, you're giving it all that you have, there's different pressures out in the system that are changing depending on if one well's on or 2 wells. So you have a lot of different variables with water level and pressures in the system that by having more of a automatic and advanced way of controlling that, it just makes for a more efficient system. And again, it's just more critical as the city gets more and more wells online to be able to do that instead of going out and manually turning valves to be able to adjust pressures that in the wintertime they partially close the valve, in the summertime they have to open it up. Those types of variables get very complicated very fast. And then thirdly and lastly, a reason why a well house is required is just the simple fact of being in there and monitoring this equipment and be able to work on it. I think you all agree that being able to do that in a lighted, heated environment is much better than out in the cold and exposed to the wind and et cetera. So summarizing, the 3 vertical wells each have an individual well house, which the costs add up significantly in those line items 10, 11, and 12. So going down towards the bottom of the table, the construction costs for the 3 vertical wells we have estimated at $1.692, where the collector well is $1.566. We add in At this planning stage, it's common for us to add in a contingency because we don't have all the detailed field information. And then we also add in a placeholder for engineering, construction admin, and legal at around 17%. So looking at the cost comparisons of the two different alternatives, 2.377 versus 2.2 million. We also know that it's important to not only look at capital costs, but also long-term O&M costs. So this is a 20-year present worth analysis where we take the capital costs and also the O&M costs and roll it back into one current cost. So even we have estimated that the vertical well, the operation and maintenance costs, to be approximately $25,000, almost $26,000 a year, whereas the O&M cost for a collector well is less at $22,000. That's because we have less number of wells, and also there's just less redevelopment and less labor to keep that well running at its optimum efficiency, so it has a lower O&M cost as well as a capital cost, and roll them back together is a present worth of $2.7 million for the vertical wells and $2.5 million for the collector well. I'm going to kind of skip over the last two bullets there because it kind of gets summarized more precisely here with this slide. The history has shown that since the city has approximately 13 existing collector wells, it's not a new technology, and we have some of those collector wells are over 50 years old, so we know that they will last that long. So we felt it would be prudent in the study, and it's industry standard to look at a 20-year period, but history has told us that we can look at a 50-year period with these collector wells, and that's what we did in this slide. History has also told us that it's not uncommon for us to have to totally abandon a vertical well after a 15 to 25-year period. So we plugged that in to replace a vertical well every 20 years. So at the 20-year mark and the 40-year mark, we're going to install a new well. And then we also looked at the annual O&M cost and roll that back. So if you look at a 50-year period, the present worth analysis gets much more dramatic, where the vertical wells come in at $6.7 million, whereas a horizontal collector well with its longevity comes in at $2.7 million. And we're not just, the unique thing about this is we're not just estimating that it'll last 50 years. We actually have collector wells in the system that have lasted that long. So kind of getting to I've hit on some of these, so I'll kind of skip over some ones that I've already talked about. But looking at the advantages and disadvantages of vertical wells, with a vertical well having a larger number, but at smaller capacity, you have some more flexibility to be able to turn them on and off, and that can sometimes give you redundancy by having more wells available to turn on. Some of the disadvantages is land acquisition. We talked about having to do additional sites, and this is particularly prudent in the area that we're looking at because there has been some landowner opposition to acquire new wells up there. It has sometimes, looking at new sites, it has been a challenge to find a cooperating landowner that is willing to have a well site on their property. And we've already talked about getting to each well and the costs associated with that. Already talked about the O&M. One thing that city staff brought up that with the vertical wells and redeveloping them every 2 to 3 years to get the capacity back requires some pretty harsh treatment of adding chlorine and acid to clean out some of the pore spaces down below in the screen, and and it's an issue with city staff having to deal with the potential health hazard with doing that. Whereas a horizontal collector well, the city staff has perfected a method about using primarily hydrostatic and kind of surging and using just plain water and pressure to clean the laterals. So continuing on with more of the disadvantages is again more sites, more permit required, the 15 to 20 year useful life, and that the yields decrease over time, and potential for greater environmental impact with one site or 3 sites versus 1 site. And then lastly, it's something that you may not think about is when we do geological study to find a sweet spot in the aquifer, many times we'll pick that, and with a horizontal collector well, we can pick that sweet spot that we found. But when we do a cluster of vertical wells, we'll for sure put one well in that sweet spot, but there's going to be other wells that are separated out that may or may not be as good as the sweet spot we found in that one general location. So you have to find more locations to find those wells, and they all have to be within the general vicinity to get that water back into the system. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of the horizontal collector well. Again, I talked about several of these, so I'll kind of hit the highlights. But we can find that sweet spot and put a well in there. The bullet number 3 up there, yields can be up to 50% higher than design capacity for short periods of time. Because our laterals are down at the bottom of the aquifer, we can draw down the water level, and we can stress that aquifer for a short amount of time, maybe for a couple weeks. In a hot August period, we can actually take out more water than what the geological condition is recharging it. So this is very beneficial to get us through that peak times when everybody's watering their lawns. So this is something that isn't conducive to vertical wells, but is to horizontal collector wells, is to get us through some tight spots and crank up the volume on those collector wells to help us through some tight spots. Just going through the lower O&M costs. You use larger, more energy-efficient pumps. Some of the other less expensive pumps, like a pitless unit, for example, has a submersible pump, and the pump is down. And that's one instance where you could use a well without a well house, is to have that submersible pump down in the well itself. However, those pumps aren't as efficient as the pumps that the city currently uses, so there's disadvantages in that respect as well. Again, we can use stainless steel laterals to get a long-term life of those wells and be able to keep them at near their original efficiency much easier than a vertical well. I had a thought and now I lost it. Well, I'll come back to it. The disadvantages are we do have more wells in one spot, so there's not as much redundancy as if you have more wells scattered out. The cone of influence is potentially larger with a collector well because it does draw it from further away, and the upfront capital cost is something that can be considered a disadvantage for the collector well. Oh, I remember what my point was. With a horizontal collector well, if you do have, for some reason, the laterals that you install down in the bottom of that 16-foot diameter caisson, for some reason, if something goes wrong with those laterals, you can close it down and dewater that caisson and simply rotate 30 degrees and punch out a new lateral if for some reason something happens to your existing laterals. So you have kind of a backup plan with that, and we've done that on several, we've done that on a few of the existing wells that use the mild steel screens where the screens did have issues. So we were able to keep that same infrastructure cost, rehabilitate the well by doing new laterals, and therefore keeping the well in production. So with that, I have one more screen that I was going to go through with. This just kind of shows you, maybe this will give the council a comfort level that there's other cities similar to the size of Sioux Falls that have either changed and are changed from vertical wells and are going to collector wells, or that they're taking advantage of the shallow aquifers and going with collector wells. So these, just going down the list there's Lincoln, Nebraska, Sioux City, Iowa, or some relatively regional cities, as well as some others, across the country that are doing some of the same things that you're considering doing right now. And then the lower half of that slide just shows some cities that are using collector wells to take advantage of the shallow aquifer setting. So with that, I'm going to switch it back over to Mark, and he's going to wrap things up.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, just to summarize with a couple of final points. Again, our facilities plan that was finalized in September, that we had public meetings and is a part of this process, makes this recommendation to use one horizontal collector well in the place of the existing 69 well. A licensed hydrogeologist has reviewed the information and has also made this recommendation. The DNR has ruled in favor of the collector well project in lieu of East Dakota Water's recommendation and not put it on. I think, from our standpoint, we've got really three key points. We've got a proven track record with this style of well. We're not in the business of buying large tracts of land for the future water development of Sioux Falls supply and then having to go out there and populate it with roads, raw water transmission mains, power, and wells. And so one of the things I think we would, our preference is, as you looked at that map of all the wells, is we'd like to have the maximum amount of water from the least amount of wells. And I think one of the things we hopefully have shown you here today is that the data shows it to us for today's dollars, but also for not only our ratepayers today, but ratepayers for years to come. And so with that, we would open it up to questions.
Councilor Staggers.
Mark, you mentioned that we don't want to buy a lot of land, and I agree with you on that too. But we do own a lot of land already, don't we? How many acres do we own for water purposes?
I don't have that acreage off the top of my head, but when we typically go in to buy for a well, our desire is to buy a small tract. Sure. One of the most recent opportunities that we had, since we were buying it from a trust, we had to buy a large tract of land. But the history shows that we haven't gone out there to buy large tracts of land for what we're trying to accomplish with this project.
Does anybody have a rough idea how much land we own?
He's absolutely right. The last tract of land was large. It was from the trust fund. Randy Jansen, Water Superintendent. You're absolutely right. The last tract of land was about 300 plus acres, but we've since reduced that also with some land exchanges, I believe, with the city. I can't remember. Sold some off or something too. We reduced it. It's been reduced. Okay, go ahead.
Do we get any hay off of that we can sell?
Yes, we do. We have a real estate takes care of real good care of us.
Very good. Mr. Kavanaugh.
Mark, the existing well 69 produces how much per day?
Do we have that data today?
Or what was its capability when it was?
It was in the 350 gallon per minute range.
Okay, so that's
approximately 0.5 million gallons per day. So that does take three of those to.
Okay.
Right.
Is the 10-inch raw water line capable of handling a collector well? Because we're essentially tripling the capacity of well 69.
That will be part of the evaluation for that. But either way, that segment would be addressed for either solution, because our target is to get 1.5 million gallons per day out of that location. Okay.
Any other questions for Mark? Very good. We have one more person in the audience that we're going to hear from, Ms. Lois Brown. Would you please come forward?
Lois Brown. I'm a representative of the City of Sioux Falls. I represent the east side on the East Dakota Water Development District. I have some past history that concerns water. I served on the Sioux Falls Water Advisory Board when it was first started. I believe the mayor was Mr. Fonder at that time, and I served on that. And as a result of that and my family's involvement in water over the years, my father developed a well, a vertical well, and my brother Jim Lacey has perfected it. There are many, not many vertical well drillers around, but I was told that the city possibly should also check out Thine Well Drilling. They're located out of Clara City. The contact person there is Alan Anderson, and I would suggest that the city also get a presentation with cost estimates towards your water needs and your well needs. I have only listened to what I consider a very, very dark cloud when it comes to vertical wells. You were just given a very wonderful presentation on how wonderful Ranny collector wells are and how very terrible vertical wells are. If you look at your own information and follow the numbers, you will find out. I received this today from a man at the city on well information. His name is Tim. I asked him if he would give me information on, his name is Tim Stefanich, and he's out at the water treatment plant. We have wells that are producing. Ranny Well in 2000, or not Ranny Well, excuse me, the well number 69 in 2006, the records say that it produced 333 gallons per minute. These wells, and the cost estimate for your vertical wells is a little bit inflated, because I know my brother just completed 3 wells for Osceola, Iowa, $35,000 each. Their total bill was, well, figure it out, $35,000 each. They are producing well over this 1,000 gallons a minute. The vertical wells, yes, they produce about 1/3 of what the Rainies are. But the information, again, in your past history, this comes from your own numbers. In 1983, the Rannies were redeveloped, excuse me. In 1974, 1975, 1982, 1983, they were also redeveloped. Now, what does it cost to redevelop 2 Rannies? This means you replace the laterals that are going out into the ground. $303,000. This was by Mr. Patton, the city engineer, when I wrote that report that I hope all of you were able to look through, 1988, $303,000. In 1988, 1 Ranny well, the cost was $600,000. In the year 2000, our cost is $2.2 million. You're going to take out a 2.5% grant or loan. 2.2 million at 2.5% is right, just the interest alone on that is over $440,000. 1988, the cost of 4 vertical wells. Again, this is only out of city information. The cost for 4 vertical wells was $157,000. In 2007, the cost for 3 of these vertical wells is in the price range of $135,000. So a Ranny in 88 costs you $600,000. A Ranny in 2007 and all the bells and whistles that you've been told about, all the wonderful technology, and that's what it is. It's a lot of wonderful technology. Each well having its own well house. This is not, with all the bells and whistles, this is not totally necessary. We have a 6-pack of small vertical wells north of the city, and I know for a fact that they do not have all of the bells and the whistles, and my goodness, they are working, they're producing. We need to always remember whose money it is that we are spending. If we spend grant dollars, nonetheless, we pay them back. So when you make a decision on this, make a decision in favor of what the taxpayers of the future are going to have to pay back. Not only the $2.2 million, but the interest on it. Sioux Falls is a large city, yes. Martin Jarrett up at Egan handles the Big Sioux rural water system. He has to be accountable for every penny he spends. He feels he says, how can you look at the numbers that I have here, the economic viability, and approve this kind of grant money? Again, I recommend to you, check out some other well drilling companies. I am not here to let you know anything about my brother's business other than he doesn't need it. He wants to get out of it. And he is, very, very, very busy all the time. Martin Jarrett also said on 1.5 acres of land, 3 wells could be placed on the edges. He said you'd have to size the pump, you have to size the wells, but theoretically you could get a lot cheaper well with the water, with what you want, the production that you're seeking. So some of us were a little bit misled.
Councilor Cavanaugh, did you have a question for Lois?
Yes, Lois, I'm trying to follow your, and believe me, everybody on this council wants to make sure that we get the maximum dollar out of our tax money, whether it's from grants or our own money. You're suggesting that the 3 vertical wells cost estimate that is shown on here
Yes.
is inflated.
I believe so.
That's the
Yes,
essence
I
of the
believe so,
argument.
because I know for a fact that they would not cost in the range of $169,000.
Okay. And in that case, Mr. Chair, if I could, I'm sorry, are you done?
No.
Okay.
Recently, our East Dakota Water Development District helped to fund a study on the Big Sioux Water Quality Study. And in so doing that, we located 350 definite point sources of pollution on our river from here to Watertown. 350 sources. I would recommend, and this is the feeling of our water board too, the members that I have shared with, we want to see Sioux Falls do something to protect their watershed. Instead of spending an outrageous amount of money on a Ranny collector well, and then expecting, because I know what I have seen, and you read my report, I know what happens to a Ranny. They also have to be redeveloped. There was a question about, anyway, what our board would like to see is more done to protect the watershed. And I recommend, if you decide, think about purchasing easements along the river. This is what Martin Jarrett is doing. He's purchasing permanent easements so that the land that feeds his wells is not being treated with fertilizer. This has proven already to show a difference in the water that he's getting out of the ground. The nitrates are less. So we need to think protection. The vertical wells are much more reasonable. 3 of them will give you the 1,000 gallons a minute that you're looking for. This well number 69, we were told at our meeting that it is producing approximately 200 gallons a minute now. In 2006, your own records state that it's producing 333 gallons per minute. How long does it take to clean a vertical well? I asked Martin Jarrett that just this morning. He says, oh, that's just a matter of hours. Just a matter of hours. How long does it take to build a Ranny well? At least 18 months. How long does it take to put in 3 vertical wells? You can call the man, I gave you his number, Buck Massa at Osceola. It takes you anywhere from 3 days to put in 3 wells, and you have them all hooked to your line in maybe 10 days, 7 to 10 days. They are online in that period of time. So if Sioux Falls needs water and they want to get it quickly, are you going to take 18 months? How many of you have ever been in a Ranny collector well or the Bragstad? Have you been inside it and seen what's going on there? I have. I took a tour. They're very, very huge. And yes, their screens can be changed. The neat thing, though, about a vertical well is that as the driller goes down into the geographical soils, every time he meets a new sand or gravel, he takes a can, such as a coffee can, and says how many feet of this particular thing, of that soils. So when he is finished getting to the bottom, to the clay, he takes and he does a sieve analysis in order that he can pack the well with the proper size P-rock for the geographical area underneath that well. On a Ranny well, that wonderful, beautiful stainless steel screen is jacked out into the ground. There is no way that the soils around it can be packed with the proper P-rock. As it's being jacked out into the ground, it can also be jacked upward. It can also be filled with little tiny rocks or sands or gravel. And if you read my report, you can understand the amount of sand that was pumped out of the Ranny wells. I thought that was the most embarrassing thing. Had that been my family telling about one of their wells, one of our wells, and the sand and gravel being pumped out of it, my dad would have just gone through the roof. Because that shows you are putting your pump in danger. The inside of the pump and the materials in there are sand does not belong in any well. And when that happens, as it happens over in Osceola, he says after a certain period of time, they have fines that come through. And he says, we just abandon the well and move over 50, 60 feet and put in a new one. And it's done in short order. So you have some things to consider. Cost, extreme cost with a Ranny well. And you have a time frame. And once again, please get some other well drillers to come and give you a presentation. There are other well drillers around. Your Bragstads are seeing me to do very, very well in their water production. And if anybody would like a copy of this, it really needs to be enlarged. I had to use a magnifying glass to read it. But it proved that, yes, the Rannies, you need 3 vertical wells for every Ranny. You compare the cost. You're the only ones who can make that decision. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity that I had to speak to you.
Thank you, Lois. Mr. Kavanaugh?
Mark, would you be able to again, justify where these cost figures came from? It's been suggested that they're highly inflated.
We certainly will. That's part of the document. And if I can, just on 2 return points, we look at this with 2 things in mind. We've got both styles of wells. We've got history on both styles of wells, and we've got a proven track record with the backbone of our system. And so we wouldn't be here to mislead anyone. And I want you to go away with that. The other piece of this that we didn't touch on, real quick point, is that as wells, clusters of vertical wells start to go down in production, it's because in some instances, if we've only got, say, 30 feet of well screen that we're trying to do, and we do that times 3, so that's approximately 90 feet of well screen that we're trying to match with almost 1,000 feet of well screen that we have with a rainy collector well. What that means is that water that travels to that screen is coming much quicker and carrying the fines that's what starts to clog up those vertical wells. The velocities of the water that go to the rainies are much slower, and that's why the frequency of redeveloping those is longer. We do have a 6-pack and a 5-pack on production that Mark can share with you as we end this conversation tonight for you, and then we'll close. Mark?
Just real quick, I know that you're getting ready for another meeting, but the 5-pack and the 6-pack that Mrs. Brown indicated, I just talked with Bruce Anderson, who's the maintenance foreman for all the wells at the water purification plant, and of the 6-pack, which were constructed in 1989, of those 6 wells, only 2 of them are now in service. 4 of them are either abandoned or in the process of being abandoned because of their production issues and they can't get their production back. So in 1989, we had a capacity of 1,500 gallons per minute. Now, with just 2 wells, it's down to 550 gallons a minute in actually less than 20 years. And the 5-pack, similar situation. Of those 5 wells, 2 of them are out of line, either abandoned or planned to be abandoned, and that capacity's gone down from approximately 1,200 when they were first developed down to approximately 795 gallons per minute right now. So there is definitely a life limit on those vertical wells. And then lastly, I did, in fact, as part of our study, we did contact Tyne Wells, and they did give us a cost estimate, and I believe Mrs. Brown mentioned $160,000. Our cost estimate was around $69,000 for a vertical well, and those numbers are backed up by a well driller. So we did look at costs from other entities.
Mr. Jameson?
One other item, we were going to look at an executive session for evaluation on Deborah. I'd like to delay that until the January, I believe it's the 6th meeting. I don't think that poses any problem for anybody, but it would be better than rushing through something tonight.
Does any councilors have a problem with that? Very good. Mr. Staggers.
Yeah, can I ask a question here about these figures that we have for tonight? When were those figures developed?
They're part of the study here, Councilor Staggers,
okay.
that went in as a part of the September 2007 report.
Okay. And then also, too, how many well house buildings do we have right now in our system for all the wells?
Jansen, Water Superintendent. The wells themselves We've had 69 wells, and currently, as we said, we got some that are out of production right now. But not every well has a well house on it.
Right.
Right. Some of the Bragstead wells that our city engineer developed are out in the airport, and obviously they are at ground level. They're underneath the ground.
So how many well house buildings do we have?
I'd have to look that up.
Because, see, this is a substantial cost here when it comes to the wells. And, for example, with the 3 vertical wells, there's $960,000 just involved in this well house building. And so, if, not all of our wells even have well house buildings, so, why do we absolutely have to have a well house building for all these vertical wells? Because it's really adding a lot to the cost.
The 5 and 6 pack, really, you'd have to go back to the 80s and look at all the costs associated with those, because they actually do have a common well house associated with them, and that was a sizable amount of money, too. So really, to look at it, you got to get all the facts and figures.
Yeah.
You do. You really do. It's very complicated to a point where there's a lot of connecting pipe work and those kind of things also, so.
Because once again, my concern is we don't have well houses for all these wells, but for these 3 that are in the figures here, we have to have them, and that's $960,000 right there.
Thank you very much, and we can certainly answer additional questions outside the meeting as well, if you so choose.
Thank you for all the participants and council for your hard work and patience, everybody. And we stand adjourned, and the regular